The sun blazed mercilessly over the Dakota Territory town square in 1872, as Eliza Harrow stood bound to the post, wrists raw against the rope, her tear-streaked face lifted toward a sky that offered no answer but silence. Judge Renner stood before her, his jaw tight, his whip raised high for the crowd to see, his voice cutting the air like a blade. This woman has defied the law. 10 lashes will scour her pride and teach her place. The crowd pressed close, their voices a mixture of hunger and unease, some jeering, some whispering prayers, children clinging to skirts, men spitting in the dust. Sheriff Amos Pike stood rigid at the edge of the platform, his badge heavy on his chest, his conscience heavier still. Eliza's little boy, Tom, clung to her skirts, his tiny fists clutching the cracked Bible strap that had once bound his father's good book, his voice trembling as he cried, "Mama, hold Papa's strap, don't let go." Her tears fell freely now, her voice breaking. "I have nothing left." Renner sneered, "Then let the law take the rest." His arm jerked downward, the whip slicing the hot air, the crowd gasping as the lash hissed toward her bare shoulders. Yet before it could strike, the earth seemed to shift, and into the square walked a calf white as snow, its hide gleaming in the sun, its dark eyes calm and terrible all at once. The lash cracked, but it landed not on Eliza, but across the white flank of the buffalo calf that had stepped between woman and judge. The beast lowered to its knees, bowing before her as though answering her cry with its own silent plea, and the crowd roared in shock, gasps and screams colliding in the dusty air. "The white calf!" cried an old Lakota elder, his voice shaking with awe. "It kneels for truth!" Tom's eyes widened, his little arms wrapping the strap around his mother's wrists as if binding her to the miracle itself. Sheriff Pike staggered forward, his hand outstretched, his breath caught between fear and faith, while Renner snarled, "It's a trick, some devil's beast." But even as he spat, no whip could move the sight from their eyes. A widow weeping, a judge frozen mid-strike, and a white buffalo calf kneeling in the dust between them. As if heaven itself had stepped into the square. For a long breath, the square was frozen, every tongue stilled by the sight of the white buffalo calf, kneeling in the dust, its head bowed between Eliza Harrow and the whip that still trembled in Judge Renner's hand. And even the flies seemed to pause in mid-air, as if the whole world had stopped to witness. Then the silence cracked, bursting into shouts that clashed like thunder. "It's a miracle!" cried a woman near the well, clutching her shawl tight. "Heaven sent it!" roared a ranch hand, dropping his hat as he fell to his knees. But just as quickly, others jeered louder, their fear hiding in their fury. "It's trickery," spat a trader. "Paint on a beast, nothing more." Renner's face burned crimson. His lips twisted as he shook the whip again, desperate to drown the rising chaos. "This is no sign of God. This is a ploy," he bellowed. "No beast decides law in this town." His words cut sharp, but they wavered against the tide of awe and terror rising in the square. Sheriff Amos Pike stepped forward, his eyes locked on the calf, his breath shallow. He had seen cattle all his life, but never one so white, so unflinching beneath the whip's sting. The calf rose from its knees slowly, calmly, then stood beside Eliza, its flank brushing against her arm as though shielding her, its gaze steady upon the judge. Eliza's tears streaked into the dust, her voice trembling. "You raised your lash to break me, but it is not me who bowed, it is truth." Tom clutched the cracked Bible strap against her wrists, his child's voice ringing above the din. "Papa sent it. Papa's strap, Papa's truth. It saved Mama." The words struck the crowd harder than the whip ever could, and men who had cheered for punishment now faltered, their mouths dry, their eyes shifting to the elder who lifted his staff high. "The white calf kneels only when innocence is trampled," the elder cried, his voice like rolling thunder. "And you all have seen it kneel." Pike's chest tightened, his hand hovering near his badge, his mind a battlefield between the law he had sworn to enforce and the sign that burned before his eyes. Renner slammed the whip against the rail, his fury breaking into a shout. "Order! Order, I say! A beast does not make law. My word does." But even as he raged, his eyes darted again and again to the pale hide beside the widow, and the tremor in his wrist betrayed that his heart no longer believed what his mouth spat. The square had turned, and no decree could force it back. The air in the square grew thick with clashing voices, a storm of disbelief and devotion that shook the dust beneath their boots. Half the townsfolk pressed forward on their knees, hands lifted as though the white buffalo calf were heaven's own messenger, while the other half shouted curses, their fear spilling out as scorn. "You'd call a beast holy?" barked a miner, his fists clenched. "It's paint and trickery." Others shook their heads, muttering prayers they had not spoken in years. Eliza Harrow stood bound still, though her back pressed against the post, less in fear now and more in awe, her tears streaking as she whispered to Tom, who clung at her side, the cracked Bible strap pulled tight around her wrists. "Hold it, son. Hold it fast," she murmured. "Your father's strength lives in this, and now it shields us." Tom's eyes, wide with wonder, fixed on the calf standing beside them, its pale hide glowing in the morning light, its breath slow, steady, calm as though it feared nothing in this world. "It doesn't move, Mama," he whispered. "It's waiting." Sheriff Amos Pike stepped forward, his boots scraping on the boards, his eyes locked on the judge. "Renner," he said, his voice carrying in the rising clamor, "you can call it trickery, but no whip of yours has ever stopped a crowd like this. They've seen it kneel. They've seen it shield her. Do you think your law stronger than their eyes?" Renner's face darkened, his grip white-knuckled on the whip. "The law is stronger than superstition," he spat, though his voice faltered against the roar of the people. The elder raised his staff once more, crying out, "The white calf kneels only for the innocent, and it has chosen before your very eyes. Deny it, and you deny heaven's hand." The crowd rippled with shouts, some crying, "Free her!" and others, "Strike her!" until the square felt ready to split down its center. Pike's hand drifted near his badge, his chest tight. He had taken an oath to uphold order, but what good was order if it crushed the innocent beneath a whip? Eliza lifted her head, her voice clear though her body trembled. "You may not believe me, Judge, but even if you do not, look to your own heart. If you strike me now, you strike what kneels between us." For a moment, Renner's eyes flicked to the calf, whose dark gaze held him steady, unblinking, and his throat tightened though his words spat defiance. "It's no sign, only flesh, and flesh will bleed when I strike again." The lash twitched in his fist, but he did not raise it, and that hesitation sent a shiver through the people who had never before seen their judge waver. Tom raised the strap higher, his child's cry breaking through the uproar. "If you strike her, you strike my father too." The crowd gasped, remembering Samuel Harrow's sacrifice, and the shouts turned into a single roar of uncertainty, half demanding punishment, half pleading for mercy, all of them bound by the sight of a boy, a widow, and a white buffalo calf that refused to move from their side. The square still thundered with divided cries when Sheriff Amos Pike lifted his arm for silence, his voice booming like a crack of thunder. "Enough! This crowd will tear itself apart before the law speaks. If judgment must be made, it will be behind walls, not in the dust." The declaration cut through the noise, and though jeers rose from Renner's loyal men, enough fell quiet for Pike to stride to the post. He drew his knife and slashed Eliza's bonds, the ropes falling to the ground as gasps surged. "Sheriff!" Renner roared, his face blazing, whip quivering in his hand. "You'll answer for this treachery." But Pike ignored him, gripping Eliza's arm and guiding her down the steps with Tom pressed close to her side. The boy's small hand clenched around the cracked Bible strap so fiercely the leather bit into his palm. The crowd parted in a wave of whispers and awe, some blessing them, others cursing, but all eyes strayed to the white buffalo calf that remained in the square, unmoving, its head lifted toward the sun, as though it had come to stay until truth was settled. Inside the sheriff's office, the air was heavy, the ticking of the clock loud against the silence. Pike shut the door hard, turning to face Renner, who stormed in behind him, his whip slamming onto the desk. "You shame this town," the judge spat. "You shame the law and your oath. She hides sin, and you cloak her with superstition." Pike met his glare without flinching. "And you'd cloak your cruelty with law. You think the people blind? You saw it kneel, you heard them cry. That strap the boy clings to belonged to Samuel Harrow, a man who gave his life for this place. Will you lash his widow in front of his son and call it justice?" Eliza stood weak but unbroken near the wall, her hand stroking Tom's hair as he whispered to her, "Mama, it stayed outside. It didn't leave us." She clutched the strap with him, her eyes fierce despite her tears. "My silence is not sin," she said, her voice shaking. "It is dignity. And if you beat me, Judge, you'll prove only that your law fears the truth." Renner's mouth twisted as he snarled, "At dawn, she will face the square again. The lash will fall, and no calf, nor strap, nor child's tears will stop it." He turned on his heel and stormed into the street, his robe whipping the dust behind him. Pike sank into his chair, his hands pressed hard to his temples, and for the first time in years, the badge on his chest felt like a weight too heavy to bear. Outside, through the window, he caught a glimpse of white still standing beyond the fence line, steady and watchful, and the sheriff knew no dawn could come without reckoning. Dawn bled gold and crimson across the town as the bell tolled again, dragging every soul back to the square, where dust rose under restless boots and voices buzzed with dread and expectation. Judge Renner stood tall on the platform, whip coiled in his hand, his robe snapping in the wind, his face carved in fury at the memory of the white buffalo calf that had stolen his spectacle the day before. Sheriff Amos Pike climbed the steps slower, his jaw locked, his eyes scanning the prairie where the pale figure had been seen. Though the calf was gone now, its presence lingered heavy in every heartbeat. Eliza Harrow was brought forward once more, her wrists bound again though she held her head high, her cheeks pale, but her gaze unbroken. Tom stumbled beside her, his little hands clamped around the cracked Bible strap, his knuckles white, his lip trembling though his eyes blazed brighter than the dawn. The crowd was a sea of conflict, men muttering for order, women murmuring for mercy, children whispering about the calf as though it were a dream they had woken from, but could not forget. Renner's voice cracked the morning air. "Yesterday's farce will not repeat. The lash falls today, and all will see that law bends to no beast, no child's lies, no widow's tears." His words rang sharp, but the silence that followed was heavier, for the people no longer swallowed them as easily. Pike opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, Tom broke free from his mother's side. Racing to the front of the platform, his small body shook as he held the strap high above his head, his child's voice carrying further than any sermon. "This is my father's," he cried. "Samuel Harrow gave this to us before he died for you all. He bled for this town, and you would beat his wife and call it justice?" A gasp swept the square, sharper than any whip crack, for every man remembered Samuel Harrow. The day raiders came, the rifle shots that saved women and children, the arrows that cut him down while others fled. Tom's words pierced old memories, and the strap trembled in his hands, its cracked leather catching the sun like flame. "If you strike Mama," Tom shouted, his face wet with tears, "you strike him too. You strike the man who died for your homes." Women wept, men shuffled their boots, unable to meet each other's eyes, while some dropped their hats, ashamed. Renner slammed his whip against the railing, spittle flying as he shouted, "The sins of the widow are her own. The dead do not wash the living clean." But his words sounded hollow against the roar of voices rising from the crowd, some crying, "Free her!" others shouting, "Strike her!" until the square pulsed like a heart torn in two. And then, as the uproar reached its peak, a murmur spread like fire. Eyes turned to the fence line, where in the growing light a pale figure had appeared again, the white buffalo calf, still and silent, watching. The elder raised his staff, his cry booming like thunder. "The boy speaks truth, and heaven answers. The calf waits for judgment." Renner's hand shook, his whip quivering, and Pike's chest burned as he realized the law he had sworn to uphold was being weighed on scales far heavier than his own. Night spread its dark shawl across the prairie, and though the square had emptied, its echoes still clung to the air like smoke after a fire. Eliza lay restless in the cot of the sheriff's jailhouse, her wrists free but her spirit bound in fear, her thoughts circling like hawks over the words Renner had spat. Sheriff Amos Pike sat at his desk, staring at the badge that gleamed dully in the lantern light, wondering whether the weight he carried was law or chains. Tom, unable to sleep, slipped from his blanket, the cracked Bible strap looped around his wrist as though tethering him to something more unbreakable than walls or iron. He crept into the night, the door groaning shut behind him, and the sheriff, though he saw the boy go, did not stop him, for some journeys must be walked alone. The prairie breathed cool and wide, the stars silver fires above, and Tom's bare feet pressed the soil until he stumbled upon them. Prints pressed deep in the earth, heavy, round, larger than any cow, gleaming pale with the dew of night. His small hands shook as he touched the edges, whispering, "It was here. It walked here." He lifted his eyes, and in the distance, where the grass rolled like waves, he saw them again. 2 points of light, steady and unblinking, eyes fixed on him with a calm that turned fear into fire inside his chest. He clutched the strap tighter, his child's voice breaking into the night. "Don't leave us. Please don't leave us. Mama needs you." "I need you!" A staff tapped the earth, and the old Lakota elder stepped from the shadows, his figure thin yet strong as he leaned into the starlight. "The white calf walks when truth is strangled," he said, his voice carrying like the wind, "and it kneels when the heavens demand it. You carry your father's strap, carry also his courage. When the whip rises again, the calf will stand where men falter." Tom's lips trembled, but he nodded fiercely, holding the strap against his chest. The elder knelt beside him, pressing his weathered palm to the boy's head. "Your father's blood bought this town. Do not let them sell it cheap." Behind them, Pike had followed at a distance, unseen until now, his breath catching as he saw the prints and the eyes glimmering in the darkness. His hand gripped his badge, but for the first time he felt its weight not as authority, but as judgment. Tom rose, dirt smudged on his cheeks, his small voice whispering, "It's real, Mama will be safe." And as he walked back towards the jailhouse, the prairie exhaled, the prints glowing faint in the moonlight, proof etched into the earth that no denial could trample. Pike lingered, staring into the starlit horizon where the calf had vanished. And he knew that when dawn came, no whip, no judge, no law written by man would silence what walked beside them now. Dawn broke fierce and golden, pouring across the rooftops and driving the townsfolk once more to the square, where the dust rose under stamping boots and the air trembled with shouts before Judge Renner had even stepped onto the platform. His face was hard as hammered iron, his whip wound tight in his fist, his eyes bloodshot with a night spent pacing. "This circus ends today," he roared, his voice cracking like the lash itself. "No beast will rule this town. No child's tears will sway its law. She will be punished, and you will see it." The crowd seethed, men shouting for order, women crying out for mercy, children clinging tighter to their mothers' skirts. Eliza was dragged forward once more, her head unbowed despite her pale face. Her wrists bound, but her spirit unbroken. Beside her, Tom stumbled, but clung fast to the cracked Bible strap, his small fingers gripping it so tightly that the leather bit into his skin. Sheriff Amos Pike mounted the platform slowly, his badge gleaming in the morning light, his face set in grim lines, his boots heavy as though each step carried the weight of judgment itself. "Renner," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "I warn you plain. If you strike her now, you strike against more than her back. You strike against truth itself." Renner turned on him, his eyes burning. "You are sworn to uphold my word, Sheriff. You'll remember your place or share her fate." Pike stood taller, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver. His jaw unflinching. "My place is where justice stands, and justice isn't in your whip." The word sent a gasp rippling through the square, a crack wider than any lash could leave. "He's right," someone shouted. "Samuel Harrow's blood bought this town, and now they'd shame his widow?" Another voice cried, "The calf kneels for her, we saw it." The elder raised his staff, his voice booming like thunder. "The white calf comes again. It waits for the lash, and it will kneel." The crowd surged, half shouting, "Free her!" half screaming, "Strike her!" until neighbors pushed, fists raised, the square splitting down its center like a log under an axe. Renner slammed his whip against the railing, spittle flying. "This town belongs to law, not to omens." But his hand shook, and when his eyes flicked to the edge of the prairie, he froze. There it was again. Pale, steady, unmistakable. The white buffalo calf, closer than before, its hide gleaming in the rising sun, its gaze locked on the platform. The people followed his stare, and a collective cry tore from their throats, some weeping, some falling to their knees. Renner snarled, his voice hoarse. "A beast is no judge!" But even as he shouted, the lash in his hand quivered, and every soul in that square knew his power was slipping. Tom raised the strap high, his boy's voice breaking in desperation. "If you strike Mama, you strike Papa too." The words hit like a hammer, and the roar of the people drowned the judge's fury. A tide that no whip could ever silence. By mid-morning, the square was no longer a gathering but a storm. Neighbors turned to enemies as voices clashed in a fury that shook the very boards of the platform. Men shouted, "Strike her," while others roared, "Set her free." Women wept, clutching children who stared wide-eyed at the spectacle, and every pair of eyes flicked again and again to the edge of the prairie, where the pale form of the white buffalo calf had drawn closer, its hide glowing against the dust as though the rising sun had wrapped itself in flesh. Judge Renner's face was red with rage, his whip coiled so tight in his hand the leather squeaked, his other fist pounding the rail. "This is lawless rabble," he spat. "One lash will silence them. One lash will remind them who rules this town." Sheriff Amos Pike stood beside Eliza, his hand hovering near his revolver, his jaw like carved stone, his voice loud enough to carry through the uproar. "Strike her now, and you'll lash yourself into ruin, Renner. They've seen the sign, they've heard the boy. You strike her, you'll break the town in half." Eliza swayed on her feet, her pale face shining with sweat, yet her eyes were steady as she looked at Tom, who pressed the cracked Bible strap against her wrists, whispering with all the force his small lungs could muster. "Papa's here, Mama, don't let them take you." Renner snarled, his eyes bloodshot, his voice trembling with fury. That strap, that beast, that boy's tears, none of it will change law." He raised the whip high, the leather hissing in the air, and 1,000 throats cried out at once, some pleading, some cursing, some falling silent in fear. The elder lifted his staff, his voice booming like thunder. "The white calf kneels where heaven commands, and heaven commands now." At that cry, the calf stepped through the fence, dust billowing around its hooves like smoke, its head low, its dark eyes fixed on the platform. The crowd gasped, a wave of sound that shook the air. Some screamed, others dropped to their knees, all straining to see. Pike's heart hammered as he felt the ground vibrate under the beast's steps, each one steady, unhurried, as though judgment itself could not be rushed. Renner's whip wavered but did not fall, his voice breaking into a roar. "This is my town, my law." He drew his arm back, leather stretched to strike, and in that breathless pause the people forgot how to breathe, waiting to see whether man's fury or heaven's sign would claim the square. The whip tore downward like a streak of fire, Judge Renner's roar rising above the bedlam, but before leather could bite into Eliza Harrow's back, the white buffalo calf surged forward with a grace that shook the square into silence, its pale body sliding between woman and lash. The crack split the air, a sound that should have drawn blood, yet when the dust cleared, the calf stood unbroken, its hide untouched, its dark eyes calm as night. Then, before 1,000 witnesses, it bent its legs and lowered itself fully to the earth, kneeling in the dust at Eliza's feet, its great head bowed as though in prayer. The crowd gasped as one, the jeers vanishing into a wave of cries and sobs, women falling to their knees, men tearing hats from their heads, children clutching at their mothers. "It kneels!" the elder shouted, his staff lifted high, his voice trembling with awe. "Heaven's hand is here! The calf kneels for the innocent!" Tom cried out, wrapping the cracked Bible strap around his mother's bound wrists, pressing it tight, as if to bind her to the miracle itself. "Papa sent it. Papa's truth," he wailed, his tears streaking his dirty cheeks. Sheriff Amos Pike stepped forward, his hand firm on Eliza's shoulder, his other raised to the crowd. "You see it with your own eyes," he thundered. "No law written by man can strike what heaven itself shields." Renner staggered back, his face drained of blood, his whip falling limp at his side. It's a trick," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the roar of the people. "Some devil's trick." He raised the whip again, but the calf did not move, its great body still kneeling, its head bowed as though daring him to strike once more. His hand shook, the leather slipping through his fingers, and for the first time since he had ruled this town, the judge looked small, shrunken before the gaze of something greater. The crowd erupted, voices colliding in a thunder of conviction, some crying, "Free her!" others shouting, "Truth!" until it was not Renner's law, but the people's awe that filled the square. Pike planted himself between the widow and the judge, his voice sharp as steel. "You'll lash no one today, Renner. Not her. Not the boy, not while the white calf kneels in this dust." The whip clattered to the boards, and with it, the last shred of the judge's power seemed to crumble. Eliza's sobs broke into gasping laughter, her tears soaking Tom's hair as she bent to kiss the strap bound between them, and the square held its breath as though waiting for heaven's final word. For a long breath, the square held still, the only movement the steady rise and fall of the white buffalo calf's sides as it knelt in the dust, its great head bowed before Eliza and Tom, as if acknowledging not just their suffering, but their survival. Then slowly, with a calmness that hushed even the loudest mouths, it rose to its feet, towering over the platform with a presence no man's law could match. Its dark gaze swept across the crowd, meeting eyes that quickly fell, for none could bear the weight of being seen by something that felt like heaven wrapped in flesh. Eliza sagged against the post, her sobs spilling as Tom pressed the cracked Bible strap into her palms, whispering, "Papa kept us safe, Mama. The calf showed it." Sheriff Amos Pike stood firm, his voice carrying over the hush. "You've seen it with your own eyes. No whip, no decree, no judge can stand against what was shown here today. This woman walks free and her boy walks with her." The crowd erupted, not in jeers but in cries of relief, women weeping, men bowing their heads, children pointing wide-eyed at the calf as though it were the answer to every prayer they had never dared speak. Judge Renner stumbled back, his whip lying useless at his feet, his lips moving without sound, his authority scattered like chaff in the wind. Some said his hand shook so badly he could not even lift it to wipe the sweat from his brow. The elder raised his staff, his voice ringing. "Remember this day. The white calf knelt in our dust, not for law, not for pride, but for truth. Forget, and heaven will remember your cowardice. Remember, and you will walk as witnesses of mercy." The calf stepped from the platform, its hooves thudding softly as it walked through the parted crowd, each man and woman moving aside in silence as though in church. It paused at the edge of the square, turned once to look back, its gaze resting on Tom, who lifted the strap high, his cheeks still wet but his eyes shining. For a heartbeat, boy and beast seemed bound together, and then, with a final snort, the calf turned and walked toward the prairie, its white hide gleaming until distance and sunlight swallowed it. Eliza sank to her knees. Clutching her son, the strap looped between their hands, the crowd gathering closer now, not in scorn, but in reverence, some even kneeling beside them. Pike lifted his badge and spoke softly, almost like a vow. "From this day, no whip will rule this town above truth." The square breathed as one, forever altered, for all who had seen knew they would carry the memory to their graves. The widow's tears, the boy's cry, and the white buffalo that knelt between them when all hope seemed lost. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Echoes of the West. If you had stood in that square when the white buffalo rose and walked away, would you have followed it or bowed your head in silence?